Thank you all for joining us for this special conversation with Carmella Padilla and Tom Leech. My name is Frances Robinson Bidwell. I'm the chair of the Endowment Committee for the Women's Board of the Museum of New Mexico, and have been honored to be a member of the Women's Board for the past 14 years. In collaboration with the Museum of Art, we're pleased to sponsor this event. For over 100 years, the Women's Board has been assisting the activities of the state-run museums through receptions for major openings. Our goal is to enhance the enjoyment of the general public in all that our wonderful museums have to offer through our signature hospitality. The endowment fund of the Women's Board was established in 2014 to honor past and current board presidents, with an initial donation from Gail and Jim Goodwin and their charitable fund. Through many subsequent and generous contributions, the fund has grown. We use the funds to raise public awareness of our historic Women's Board and to support the educational goals of the state museums and historic sites. Sponsorship of this event is an example of the work we do. So, on behalf of the Women's Board and our endowment, welcome. I'm anxious, as I know you are, to hear all that Carmella and Tom have to say about the Venerable Gustave Baumann.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Nail. I'm the head of education for the New Mexico Museum of Art, and I'm excited to welcome you all here today for our conversation with Tom and Carmella around their new book, which I made sure to grab from my office so I could, in case anybody hasn't seen it yet, Printing the Spirit, Gustave Baumann's Santos, published by Museum of New Mexico Press, designed by David Skolkin, and which, while talking with Tom and Carmella last week, I found out won a 2005 New Mexico Book Association Award. So congratulations. Thank you. For anyone who's interested, following to this afternoon's talk, starting at about 5:15 out in the lobby, we will be having a book signing. So we may need a little bit of help from everyone, making sure we can get these two out to the lobby. So, all right. Before we begin this afternoon's program, first I'd like to offer a huge thank you to the Museum of New Mexico Foundation, and especially to the Women's Board of the Museum of New Mexico and the Women's Board Endowment Fund for sponsoring this afternoon's talk and for all of the support that they give to our institution and to all of the different museums across the Department of Cultural Affairs. Your long-term support means a tremendous amount to us, and I think we can easily say you might just be our longest-term partner that we work with. So thank you so much for that. Let's see. I'm going to take just kind of a wild guess here and assume that at the end of our hour, we may not have completely taken care of all of the curiosity that you might have around Gustave Baumann and his life and works and anything that he did. There's plenty of topics there. So if you are still curious, and I suspect you will be, I'd like to invite everyone back to the museum on this Sunday for Baumania. So we will be having a day of free programming here at the Art Museum and across the street with our partners at the New Mexico History Museum. We'll be focusing a lot on Baumann's marionettes. There will be marionette shows at 3 and 4. We'll have a couple of other speakers throughout the day, as well as some other activities. Across the street at the History Museum, they have a phenomenal slate of programs and speakers scheduled. Largely, they're going to be trying to dive into perhaps some lesser known aspects of Baumann's life and career and his creative endeavors and the people around him. So I know I'm going to be wanting to be in two places at once, so don't miss out if you're interested in that. While I suspect that Tom and Carmella are probably pretty well known to everyone in the audience today, please bear with me and let me do a little bit of a short introduction. So if nothing else, I have to brag about these two a little bit. So Tom Leech is the former director of the Palace Press and curator for the New Mexico History Museum. Under his guidance, the Palace Press won the 2013 Mayor's Award for Excellence in the Arts, the 2014 Carl Herzog Award for Excellence in Book Design, and the 2015 Edgar Lee Hewitt Award from the New Mexico Association of Museums. So Tom had a busy couple of years there. Tom has over 40 years of experience in printing, paper making, book arts, and he has taught in all of these different areas around the world. Tom has also authored or contributed to numerous books, including Gustave Baumann and Friends, Artist Cards from Holidays Past, and In a Modern Rendering, the color woodcuts of Gustave Baumann, a catalog raisonné. And I'm going to real quickly, Tom and I were talking right before we got started, and I'm going to go ahead and Tom's going to pass the reins to me on something that I've been hearing him say for a long time. So just so everybody knows, the name is Gustave Baumann, not Gustave. As Tom has drilled into my head over the years, he was a Gus, not a goose. So just so everybody says it correctly. And I thank Tom for making sure, correcting me plenty of times, very deservedly so over the years. Carmella Padilla is a journalist, author, and editor who explores intersections in art, culture, and history. She has published extensively in newspapers and magazines, including the Wall Street Journal, American Craft, and El Palacio, and has written several books, including The Work of Art, Folk Artists in the 21st Century, El Rancho de las Golondrinas, Living History in New Mexico's La Cienega Valley, and Low and Slow, Low Riding in New Mexico, and The Chili Chronicles, Tales of a New Mexico Harvest. Native Santa Fean, Padilla is a co-founder of the Santa Fe International Literary Festival and a recipient of the Santa Fe Mayor's Award for Excellence in the Arts and the New Mexico Governor's Award for Excellence in the Arts. She is currently at work on a book highlighting the historic makers and movements in 20th century New Mexican furniture. So please join me in welcoming Tom and Carmella. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I have the enviable job of peppering these two with questions for the evening. We will have some time towards the end, 10 or 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So if something pops to your mind, hold on to that and we'll do our best to get to it at the end. So my first question for you two, I feel like is kind of the obvious, but maybe it's good to kind of start with a little bit of a softball just to warm up. In 1927, Little Saints of New Mexico, the original title for this book started as a collaboration between Baumann and Peggy Pond Church. In your essays for the book, you both discuss the many, many attempts that Baumann made to get this book published. The different challenges that were encountered, the champions that showed up to try to help move this along, partners who came and went along the way. But now, almost 100 years later, the two of you, with some other partners, have actually managed to complete the work that Baumann started. What's this journey of getting the book finally published been like for you?
Great.
It's his fault.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Not really. Well, Carmella and I have gotten a lot closer through this experience, I'll tell you. It's been great working with her, and I've learned so much from her about writing, about patience, many things. What was the question?
What's it been like to essentially finish something like this book that Baumann started and in his lifetime wasn't able to actually complete? So in a way, sort of taking up that torch and finishing the process.
Well, for me, when the various elements that he worked on during his life all came to the History Museum, and me having been a printer for most of my life, and I looked at all these things, I just realized this is something that needs to be done. And then the opportunity to dig into the Baumann archive, which we'll talk about a little more, I realized what a big story this was. So initially, the first part of this project was printing the limited edition book from Baumann's original blocks. And what little I knew at the time, we put into that. And I was lucky to run into Carmella and bring her into the project. But, you know, we finished that limited edition and I thought, okay, we've done it all and I could retire. But there was more to the story. So why don't you?
Well, I think that, so Tom and I had known each other as acquaintances just professionally for a long time. And I had always, frankly, dreamed of working with Tom because he does these beautiful limited edition books. And we got to know each other a little bit more while I was working on another project about Baumann, about a painting that he had done, which is a very iconic painting in the history of Santa Fe. But I started looking at Baumann myself through the lens of just this one painting, and then suddenly started learning from Tom about the resources that were available to us in terms of the archives that were coming to the History Museum, the collections here at the Museum of Art. And you start to learn about the person, and he is such a compelling personality. And you think you know Baumann by just looking at his beautiful, luminous landscapes, and which are what most people identify with Baumann. And but these archives gave the opportunity to delve a little bit deeper, and suddenly you have just new worlds of Baumann. And I had written about Spanish colonial art, New Mexico Santos. It was sort of a perfect sort of coming together, and we weren't really sure what we were going to do, but we started taking this journey, honestly, through the archives, sort of like through the evidence, and it just led us along into the directions that needed to be done for our essays in terms of the artwork and how it needed to be presented. And I would just say that, and this is Tom always talking like, what would Gus want? What would Gus want? And, you know, we'd stumble and things would happen and we'd say, well, Gus is laughing at us now because we can't really get this done. But we've kind of really felt guided by his voice throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. You know, the original book, part of my real desire to get it out was it came along with a typescript by Mary Austin. And I didn't know that much about Mary Austin, but I knew she was a big name. This is, you know, this is important. And so I showed it to some Baumann scholars who said, "Oh, you can't print this." It was just there were mistakes, there were assumptions being made, it wasn't necessarily flattering to the Hispano culture here. I think she was writing it for an Anglo audience, basically. And, but I still felt pretty committed to, you know, yeah, but this is historic, this is important. You know, it needs to be, somebody needs to read it. And that's when I mentioned it to Carmella, who just said, sure. And she just jumped right in.
Well, Mary Austin is a famous figure, not only as an author, but in the history of Spanish colonial art in New Mexico. And she really helped pioneer the field that we have today. So she was not always the most pleasant personality. That we learned that through reading Gus's evaluation of her, as well as many other people. And she, you know, the essay was a little, I could see how it could be scary to some people. To me, it was really a sort of a social commentary and a social history, and also a history of how this community in art in Santa Fe evolved. And for better or worse, you know, nothing is black and white when you're looking back in time, especially from the lens that we tend to look at things today. but the contributions were major, and also it was an opportunity to say, okay, here is somebody who was trying to document something that was very important to this culture and to the Hispano culture especially. And no, she didn't get it all right. How could she? But she did notice something important in that was valuable, and she moved it along. And so I really wasn't afraid of it. I thought, well, you just call it out when it's wrong, it's wrong. And but also let's call out the contributions that were made that we still benefit from today.
So since Mary Austin's kind of come up, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in my list of questions. As you noted, Mary Austin was one of the other major players in this book, and I know in some of our conversations, we've talked about Mary Austin, being a major contributor, even just to the field of Spanish colonial arts as a field of study, but having sort of a kind of a loud impact on those things, I think was one of the terms that got used. Whereas Baumann, I think, is known for being a little quieter, a little more reserved, no less important or no less impactful, but of a very different flavor. Would you two be able to talk a little bit about how that relationship came about, and how did that work? Or not work,
Do you want to
perhaps?
say what her nickname was?
Oh yeah, so Mary was, she had been around already, of course, and so when she was in Carmel, founding the art colony in Carmel, California, her nickname was God's mother-in-law. Because she was kind of bossy, and she was know-it-all. So that's the sort of approach she applied to this field of study, of course. They both just very sort of coincidentally landed in Santa Fe at the same time, 1918. Baumann got off the train from Taos, off the train from Taos and stayed. She actually had been in Taos hanging out with Mabel Dodge, Lujan, but those two women, their personalities were just like way too big for one space. And so Mary, each kind of wanted to be the diva, right? And so Mabel had already staked out Taos. So Mary came here to want to be the diva here, basically. And so she and Gus met immediately, and they immediately started running around in the same circles and contributing to the same community projects.
Yeah, well, Mary started the community theater, and Gus was her stagehand. That's what he called himself. And they put on performances actually right here on this very stage.
They were very different personalities, for sure. Yeah. And I think I said in something that I wrote that, whereas Mary engaged in the Santos, he was an observer, even though they may have been together on the same journeys looking at Santos. And there's one famous journey when they are together on a buggy ride through northern New Mexico, and with Mabel Dodge Lujan and Tony Lujan, and they're traveling through all these little villages, and Mary is collecting Santos. And Gus is actually not really loving that fact. He's not feeling like these pieces of devotional art should be collected for money. And so it's right off the bat you see that there's a different approach, but then that sort of steered Gus into his own approach to preserving the Santos, because he was seeing that at that time the communities were changing and people were putting a monetary value on something that had not had a significant monetary value before. And so we came to the conclusion together from his writings that he was really trying to document this art form and these particular Santos, and that's why he started working on this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Baumann family, Jane, Gus, and even Anne remained friends with Mary Austin all her life, and they were probably some of the few people who really stuck by her, whereas she alienated so many other people. but they were with her right to the end.
Thank you. So talking about the Santos, Tom, I'd like to kind of throw this question out to you to start with, but anybody who wants to speak on it, of course, jump right on in. Tom, obviously, as someone who has worked with Baumann's original blocks, and at least for me, you, in some respects, really sort of embodied that aspect of the craftsman that Baumann is so closely connected with.
I wish.
Every once in a while, I feel like I get a little taste of the Baumann spirit to read it. So thank you for that. But something that you touch on in your essays is how Baumann related to the Santos and the Santeros as a fellow woodcarver. Somebody who understood what that the work of the hand really meant, and so being able to relate to them and what they were creating on that kind of level. Like Carmella, like you were saying, maybe not looking at these as things that needed to be collected, but really relating to them in that sort of unique way. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your understanding for how Baumann worked with these people and how he understood what they were producing and these works of art, these works of craft that they were making.
Well, I think he probably never got a chance to work with many of the original Santeros, because in his mind anyway, the tradition was almost going away. Luckily, he wrote later that he hoped that whatever the research and whatever his contributions could be, he would hope that would come back, which in fact it has come to pass, very much maybe in part because of him and Mary Austin and a few other people. But more than that, I think he just had this eye and a deep feeling for craftsmanship. He just saw it, and that's what he grabbed onto, whether it was the Santeros, the Santos tradition, whether it was indigenous pottery, which he was also very interested in trying to document because it was going through its own transition in the early 20th century. But it even goes back to the time that he spent in Indiana and his integration into the local community. Brown County, Indiana, and Nashville, Indiana, was thought of as probably the most backward place in America, but he fitted in with the community, and he got to know the local craftspeople, meaning the guy who was building wagons, the blacksmiths, anybody else, the weavers, and he just really responded to that. And that was probably, maybe he picked up something from his year and a half in Germany. He went to a craft school. It wasn't the fine arts school in Munich, it was the School of Craft. And they were already into a kind of folk art. And he just became an advocate for folk art. And I would say the creative spirit wherever it came out. So when he saw these carvings, he must have, and he recognized it as a sophisticated iconography, whereas a lot of people just called it primitive art. And that wasn't his approach to it at all. But as a craftsman, he could really zero in on it and paid attention to how things were made and just had a real appreciation for it and wanted to share it, wanted to save it, which we're glad he did.
Yeah, I think that he looked at the Santos as a way also to understand this new community and this new place where he was living. And he was so much about art as being accessible, being not expensive, something that everybody could enjoy. And they were so symbolic, the Santos were so symbolic of something that was shared throughout the community, and that people really, it didn't matter what your economic status was. If you were raised in the community here with the devotional art, you were going to have this work, and it was going to be important. So it was really told him a lot about the values of Nuevo Mexicanos at that time. And I think he also saw them really as vessels of faith. And he was not, interestingly enough, he was not a religious man. He did not ascribe to really any religion. He was raised as a Lutheran, but he often wrote about how that was just sort of fire and brimstone, and he couldn't handle it. His wife Jane, who played such a major role in his career and his life here, she was a founder of the Quaker Friends Meeting House in Santa Fe, a co-founder with Olive Rush, and he would attend some of their meetings, but he wasn't really a religious person in terms of dogma and ritual tradition, but he was very spiritual. And you know that by reading his work through time, because he left all this wonderful art, but he also left so many writings that give you more insight into his personality and to his beliefs.
Yeah, and he wrote at the end of his life that he wished he had come across opportunities to do more spiritual work. He said it's a great avenue for artists instead of leaving so many stillborn projects behind, which I can attest to. So.
I suspect there's a few folks in the room who know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So. Moving on to another one, and Carmella, if you could kind of dive into this one for us first. An element that you touched on in your essay for the book really did kind of note a little bit of looking back on Baumann and his work, but through kind of a contemporary lens, through sort of a contemporary art world lens. Baumann wasn't from New Mexico. He wasn't a native Santa Fean. He was born in Germany, largely grew up in Chicago, spent time in Indiana, and didn't really end up here until he was an adult. And despite the fact that Baumann talked about kind of wishing he had been born in the Southwest and really deeply loving this place and considering it his adopted home, he wasn't a native of this place. So one of the things that you mentioned is kind of wondering what Baumann might have thought about some of the discussions in the art world now around cultural appropriation and how that his work might be viewed through that lens, and sort of the way that he approached this work of a culture that was not something that he was born into, but more that he came to love when he came here, and really this became his home. So can you talk a little bit about that element?
Yeah, there is a quote that he said, and it was something like, since art can be made anywhere, the geographical accident of birth or color of skin should be of no consequence, basically. So he was, in his mind, art was the most important thing, creativity, expression, at that point in time. But he also had a very keen awareness that he was an outsider, because he also wrote about how he was part of this Anglo class that was the very last to arrive. He was saying indigenous peoples had been here for centuries. Then you had Hispano communities that had been here, and he was very keenly aware that he was always sort of on the outside looking in. And he was, as a result, I think he was successful. And people have said to me, well, that is cultural appropriation. Everybody who was around this, working around this project, none of them were Catholic, Hispanic, New Mexico. Well, Peggy Pond Church was New Mexican, but but I think that if you look at art in a way, the purpose of art as being a lens on the issues of society, and a lens of Santa Fe at that time and still today, this book really talks about, one, the compelling cross-cultural attraction of the Santos to all cultures, and also talks about how do you make art in a multicultural community? Who owns it? Does anybody own it? How do you grapple with that? My conclusion ultimately was that, nobody really owns any of it. It's if you're dealing with these cultural issues appropriately and responsibly and respectfully, that's the key. And there are plenty of individuals during that time period that did not do so, per se. And but he did. He really, I think he was keenly aware that he was living in an extraordinary place at an extraordinary time. And he also viewed his life here and his interactions in the community as a responsibility and not a privilege.
Yeah, he was just so respectful of all of this material. And, when I think of cultural appropriation, it's like, I'm gonna start making my own Hopi Kachinas or something, But he never did anything like that, And even the book, he was just trying to get it out so other people could appreciate it. He wasn't making bultos himself. I think that's, I don't think you can tar him with that brush as an appropriator.
And we can't forget Peggy Ponchurch, who was his first collaborator on the project. She was the one he first invited to write poetry. And at the time, this was in the 1927 or so, she was an unknown poet living in Los Alamos, where she was raised on the Pajarito Plateau, pre-Los Alamos. And she would go on to write The House at Ottawee Bridge, which everybody knows her for today, but she was a very unknown and rather insecure poet at the time that he tapped her to do this. And from the very first poem that she wrote that what they talked about, however much they talked about the approach to this book, it had to do with his concern and hers, I'm sure as well, that the Santos were being suddenly commercialized and taken out of their context and in traditional communities or their traditional context. And so her first line of her first poem for the book, which is called Los Santos, is "The little saints are leaving." And that's her main declaration at the beginning of her series of poems.
And that became the working title of the book that never got done.
Yes.
Yeah, and when I look back through our book now and I read those poems, I really feel like those poems are just really the heart of the book. She just nailed it with what Baumann was trying to say in his work. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking, you can't see it, Carmella, but I'm seeing these, and these are images from our book. And that's what really got me hooked on doing the second edition, because in part of the archive that came to us were Baumann's original drawings that just floored me. And so he did, for each of the blocks that he carved, he did a rendering of an original bolto or retablo, and with such fidelity. He was such a keen observer, and that carries through from his drawings to his blocks to the final print. So it was important for us to try to research where the original pieces were. And so it was great that we could actually pull some of these things together.
We did find some of the originals
Yeah.
in museums here in Santa Fe and in Colorado Springs. Only, I think, 5 out of the suite of 34. But that was such a great discovery and in fact, we found the original Santo that Mary Austin purchased out of the Morada in Abiquiu on the buggy ride with Baumann. And that piece is now in the Colorado Springs Fine Art Museum, the Taylor Museum, and it's still in the collection there. And so finding those pieces and then seeing his drawings and wood blocks and the prints was amazing, because he was looking at these things and being so respectful and so true to what they were. I wish I knew where the others are.
We hope some of it comes out from this book, that somebody says, hey, I have got that piece, it's sitting right there. Yeah.
If I can ask one more question before we open it up for audience participation. Something that you mentioned is sort of the multicultural aspect of Baumann working in Santa Fe, especially in the early 20th century. And one thing, working here at the museum, of course, Baumann being such a big part of our collection, we get to hear stories about, hey, I remember seeing, my grandmother had that print up in her house. I remember that. Talking about Baumann wanting his work to be accessible, to be something that people could actually get their hands on. His desire to help to, preserve the community, what he was learning about New Mexico and his new adopted home. So whether we're talking about the Santos or pictographs that he recorded to try to make sure that there would be a record of those things going forward. What do you view as, I may be asking you just to kind of select a favorite through line through some of this, but what do you see as sort of your favorite or a major part of Baumann's lasting legacy that we're still feeling the impact of today?
How about an easy one?
Okay.
I would like to think that this work for creative people who see this work would be inspired by the amount of work that he put into it. Virtually everybody who takes a look at all this stuff says, did the guy ever sleep? There's so much. This exhibit has something over 200 pieces, which is a fraction of what this museum holds. Other museums have more stuff. The History Museum just got this great treasure trove of smaller pieces. There's more work to be done. And but what is the takeaway from all this? Just to be inspired by, I feel like he teaches us how to see. When we look at the Southwest designs or any of those landscapes, and then you learn how he made them, how did he take 4 or 5 colors that he mixed the ink himself and create these scenes that you wish you could walk into? That's not easy to do. And I could probably go on, but I'm not going to.
Well, yeah, he was so incredibly prolific. So we sort of think of him as superhuman, of course. There were no computers and TVs a lot of the years that he was doing what he was doing, but he did work all the time. And but also, he was a regular guy. He was really funny. He had a great personality. If you read his writings, he's hilarious. He would write these crazy letters to the editor. He just had such a great personality, and he was so authentically community-minded. And so I think in terms of legacy, we're still having so much fun watching the marionettes every Christmas here at St. Francis Auditorium and this weekend. But he and Jane started that as a community thing in their home where they'd invite Anne's kids, their daughter's kids, friends, to come and enjoy the marionettes. And then pretty soon they took it to the Museum of International Folk Art, and then they took it elsewhere. And they wanted to connect to the community, and they also really wanted to share the joy that they got. I feel like the joy of discovery. So much of his work is really about his sense of curiosity and discovery. But they wanted it to still be part of this community, and it's here still. And we both wish we could go back in time and hang out with Gus a little bit, but we can't. But we're still able to do that a bit through seeing his work and certainly through experiencing the marionettes.
And I often wonder, could he function in today's world? How would he function in today's world? He was not a Luddite, but because he would adopt the contemporary tools that were available to him. I mean, one of the things that surprised me so much was all the photographs he took. He had a Brownie camera, and he took over 1,800 photographs that are now digitized and online, but they're housed at the photo archives at the Palace of the Governors. But with all the distractions we have now, how would he focus? But I know there are craftspeople here in town who do the same thing, who can work.
The other really cool thing, though, about this, you said, what was the journey like of completing this after 100 years later? I mean, he wanted this book to be published so badly. He went to publishers all over the country. He had multiple asks out there over time, and he kept at it, and he never saw it come to fruition. And I just feel like we owed him sort of the favor of honoring his legacy by completing this, and we hope he likes it.
Right. Well, thank you. With that, I think we will open this up for some questions. Thank you. Okay, so if anyone has a question, if you could put your hand up, Stacy Hasselbacher, our Deputy Director, has a microphone just so that nobody has to shout and everybody can hear you.
Thank you. Was he known in other parts of the country during his lifetime, and did he have exhibits around the country?
I didn't get.
Was he known in other parts of the country during his lifetime, and did he have exhibits in other parts of the country?
All over. He had traveling exhibits of his work and along with other woodcut artists before he even came to Santa Fe. In fact, that's what brought him to Santa Fe, was his work was being shown here in the brand new art museum. But he corresponded, there's voluminous and correspondence with him with galleries and museums all over the country, all through his life. He was well known. I mean, I would have to say he probably wasn't a household word, but in the art world, he was known and hugely respected.
I have a question just on identifying the saints. How did you go about, I know Gus identified a number of them himself, but did you have any problems identifying who was who?
No, not really. I mean, Gus, was an example. It was an emerging field of study. He was learning about the saints, and in fact, both he and Mary Austin misidentified a lot of the saints, and maybe they heard who it might be in a community somewhere, or they took a guess based on other prototypes, maybe from other cultures. The thing about New Mexico Santos, even though they've derived from Santos in Spain and Mexico, and also the European traditions, they're very specific, many of them, to these communities. And so if he had seen saints in Germany, let's say, and identified somebody with certain iconography there, it wouldn't necessarily always be a direct translation here. So the field of study now in Spanish colonial art is so well developed that I could look at these and know who it was. And also we consulted with a few scholars just to double check, and we did correct the misidentifications that Baumann and Mary Austin both made, because we felt we needed to do that.
I have a question based on experience I had. I had dinner with Jane and Gus in the fall of 1970, And the second night I went there, it was because I was a Quaker, so I met Jane. After dinner, we were going to talk in the living room. The marionette stage was still there. And I think Jane sensed that he was very tired. And so she said, I'll play a recording that was made, an interview with him. So my question is, did you listen to those interviews? Was it the museum who made the interviews? Is it possible to hear them?
Yes. As far as I know, we have all the known recordings of Baumann. Many of them were made right there in the Baumann living room, and some were just family chats and so on. But everything that came to us has now been digitized over at the History Library, thanks to a grant from the Anne Baumann Trust. And I believe they're online, so you can actually hear them online. And Sunday, I think, at the History Museum, they're going to be, during the presentations, there'll be, I think, about a 15-minute period where they're going to play some of them. And it's great to hear his voice. He had an amazing voice. So.
And I think that he was, so the buggy ride that I mentioned is in his voice. And he's telling about going throughout northern New Mexico with Mabel Dodge and Mary and Tony. And it's crazy. It's hilarious in so many areas. And just listening to the way that he told the story. But again, I think he was also, it wasn't ego that he was just recording these things. I think he was recording these experiences because he knew that he was in Santa Fe at an important time, or in northern New Mexico at an important time, and he was documenting history for us. And, you know, thankfully he did, because now historians can go into those and listen to them and learn more about the time.
But he also made up what the family called bathroom songs. And he would sing some of them, and they're just hilarious. And you can hear them.
Another piece of historical context is you think about the World War ending and there's this whole disillusionment with the commercialization and, you know, the loss of culture. And then we have the Bursum Bill, you know, that comes out of Santa Fe. And here he is living right in Santa Fe. And I think it was 1923 when it was introduced into Congress, which basically was going to legalize massive appropriation of Indian lands. And all these writers, thanks to Mabel and Mary Austin and so on, you know, really worked on making very precious the arts of New Mexico, not just the Spanish colonial, but, you know, the indigenous arts and so on. And there's so much right there pushing back against this whole commercialization, you know, after the war. And so, you know, I think he, you know, the cross-fertilization of all these people who had come, and isn't he, Baumann, the one who said that Santa Fe was the Paris of the West? Wasn't that his expression?
I heard that.
Yeah, I think it was. But I read a lot of Cather's letters. I wrote my dissertation on Cather, and she describes going with Mabel and actually with Tony alone, Tony Lujan alone, to all these different pueblos and traditional Hispanic villages, and, you know, and just appreciating the art and pushing back against the materialism of modernism.
Do you know if he ever connected with Nicholas Roerich? Nicholas Roerich was a Russian painter in the early 19th.
I don't know.
There's no
I don't know if he
correspondence.
did. I don't know if there was a connection. I know Rohr, is that his last name?
Roerich.
Yeah, Rohr was here in New Mexico for a while.
Right.
I don't know if they connected or not, but he seemed to know everybody, or everybody knew him.
Yeah, there seem to be a lot of parallels. I mean, Roerich was Russian, but he was very much also in a spiritual realm and connecting with people and travel to the Himalayas and so on. But anyway, it would be very interesting if they had an interface.
Well, the archive is amazing because of the correspondence that we do have. And no doubt some was lost, but the number of people he corresponded with around the country was phenomenal. There's correspondence with Booker T. Washington, John D. Rockefeller, just a whole range of cultural types, and even just letters of appreciation from people who have seen his work and just written to him, really kind, admiring letters. And Baumann was definitely tied into the graphic arts community and the other printers. He knew them and they knew him.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Has there ever been any thought or discussion of having a Baumann museum established for himself?
This is it. Don't think so, but the collections are accessible, and there have probably been more Gustave Baumann exhibits here than any other artist, I imagine. And I know that there's more work to be shown. So
Until there's another one, we'll do our best to fill the gap. So,
Well, and just so you all know, Tom was a guest curator of this wonderful retrospective, and it's fantastic. And there's also a retrospective catalog that goes along with this exhibition as well, that even delves into other areas of Baumann's life and art. So
Yeah,
lots to learn.
really grateful because we have all these resources now that we can expand on what was known about him. Into next year, one of the gallery closes at the end of January, and the other three galleries, I think, are open till more or less the end of February.
February 22nd, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. But it sure would be nice if it was extended. Hint, hint.
Would you please talk about Baumann's role in the preservation of the Santuario Church and how that relates to his interest in the book?
So Baumann and Mary were together on this buggy ride early on in their relationship, and they went to the Santuario when it was still a family-owned chapel, and he talked about it as being a place that would inspire belief even in the non-believer. So they had that experience there together, and I'm sure that took him back many times, because then he did woodblock prints of the Santuario, etc. So there was a period of time in the late 20s when the depression and everything, it was really taking a toll, and the family that owned the Santuario, the Abeta family in Chimayo, could no longer afford to really maintain it, and it was full of these santos, these historical santos. And because there was now a market, some of them were starting to be sold off. And Gus got word of it somehow. He alerted the Santa Fe New Mexican about the possibility of this being sold off. He then called Mary Austin, who by that time had been a co-founder of the Spanish Colonial Art Society. She was back east somewhere, and basically they said, okay, let's find the money to buy this. If they're going to sell it, let's find the money to buy it intact. She found a donor. They purchased the property and all of its contents for $6,000. And under the auspices of the Spanish Colonial Art Society at that time. And the Spanish Colonial Art Society immediately turned it over to the Archdiocese of Santa Fe with the condition that it remain in perpetuity as a religious, as a church with the Santos and everything, and also a sort of a religious museum. So they both were very integral, but Gus sounded the alarm first and foremost.
Yeah. And there's this great photograph of the turning over of the deed to the archdiocese with all this cast of characters in it. And I don't think you knew this, but I just found this out not long ago, that the one of the Hispanic people in the picture is the great-grandfather of a fellow who lives right across from the Santuario, Patricio Chavez, who used to be a guard at the History Museum.
Oh my God.
But he's a Santero now. But he showed, yeah, that's my great-grandfather right there.
Wow, wow.
Yeah. That's the kind of intertwining that is still extant here in Santa Fe, which makes it so great.
And the Santiago, which is a really famous bulto from the Santuario, is one of the pieces that he replicated. And that is still in the Santuario. So if you go there today, you see it on the altar as Gus saw it when in his early years exploring the Santuario. But it's also replicated in this book.
Okay, I think we're going to need to end it there. Just as a reminder, we've got the book signing coming up in just a little bit. And thank you, Tom and Carmella.
Thank you.